Greetings friends, welcome to Premium Light Academy. We are your one-stop shop for improving your photography skills. Welcome back to chapter 4 of our Lightroom for Beginners lesson. Now, if you're just now joining us, be sure to go back and watch chapters 1, 2, and 3. That way chapter 4 will make a lot more sense. In this lesson, we will be going deeper into the development module to make some more creative edits to our pictures. So, let us begin. All right, friends, welcome back to Lightroom for Beginners. We are now in part 4 of our series, Advanced Development Module. Now, if you've missed part 1, 2, and 3, I strongly suggest that you go back and give those episodes a look. They'll basically catch you up to where we are at this point. So before we launch right in, let's do just a quick summary. We began in our library module, which we use to organize our pictures, as we can see here. We had 3 different photo shoots that we started off with. In this case, we're focusing in on Ashley in this wheat field. We created a series of collections over here. And we've got our initial edit. This is Ashley in the wheat field. We made some selections. We honed our selections down to 13 files. And then we did one more row of selections to get down to our final 7. Now that we're in our final 7, we entered into the development module and we made some basic edits. As you can see over here, the basic editing panel has been used. We kind of bumped our exposure up a little bit. We did some highlights and a couple other little baby adjustments. Now with our big ticket overall macro photo adjustments out of the way, we're going to concentrate on making some local edits that will really help to bring this image to life. So what do we mean by local edits? The easiest way to describe this is to just grab a quick circular neutral density filter here. I'm going to create a quick little circle around Ashley's face. And basically what a local edit is it allows us to target a specific area and only affect what happens within that specific area. So up until now, when we were working in our basic development module, all we could do was affect the entire image. As I slide my exposure left and right, it affects literally the entire image. Now I do have the ability to specifically target just the highlights or just the blacks. But in this case, what I really want to be able to do is get in and start getting into the nitty-gritty and creating localized edits that don't affect the entire image overall. So I've kind of gone and messed this one up, so let's go ahead and hit the reset button here. And this will be a good recap on the overall development module. So let's do a quick few edits. I'm in the basic development module and I'm going to bring my exposure up to 0.25. That looks pretty good. I'm bringing my highlights down just a little bit to ease off some of the highlights creeping into those skin tones. I'm going to take my blacks and my shadows down just a tiny little bit. This image was pretty darn good right out of the camera. Let's roll down again, being very careful to not fool with color saturation. You don't need to go there when it comes to working with people and skin tones. We're going to skip this panel because we've already kind of done most of those. And I'm going to go into my luminance for yellow and I'm going to affect only the yellows. I'm going to bring these yellow plants in the background down just a little bit. Let's bring them down about 18 points. Okay, so that's really all that we've done overall in our master development module. So now what I want to do is I want to start getting in and only affecting specific zones of this image. Now, how do I affect just a specific zone? All right, well, let's draw our attention up here to this little series of tools in the top of Lightroom's development module. Over here, I have crop, and then I have a clone stamp, which they call spot removal. I have a red eye reduction, which is really good if you're using a flash. In this case, we're not using a flash. I have a graduated neutral density filter. This is definitely one of my favorite tools, and you'll see why in just a minute. And then we have a circular neutral density filter, which is a really rad tool in and of itself. We'll definitely be using this one as well. So let's begin with the graduated neutral density filter. Now, if you're new to photography, basically what a graduated neutral density filter does is that it starts from dark to light. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go over in this little section here. You can see that my cursor has been changed into a little plus sign. And I'm going to click right around here and I'm just going to drag in this direction. As you can see, I've started to create this 3-line parallax. And as I move this over in this direction right about here, I'm going to let it go. And now I can kind of grab in the center and I can change the position of this. But basically what's going to happen is that I haven't told this filter what to do just yet. So let's go over here in our development module, and now everything that I'm dealing with in this graduated neutral density filter, it happens right here. If I were to close this panel, it goes away and it takes me back to my basic development module. If I reopen this panel, I'm once again faced with this particular filter. And as you can see, Lightroom is giving me a preview of what happens. There's this weird pink looking color starting off in the top left, and it gradually disappears as we move closer to Ashley. So Lightroom is saying, here's how this filter is going to work. We're going to manipulate the pixels on the left-hand side, and we're gradually going to taper that edit off into nothing as we move to the right. So let's see what this looks like in practice. The filter, again, isn't doing anything right now because I haven't told it what to do just yet. But let's say that I want to bring the exposure down. Watch what happens in the left-hand corner here. So I can bring my exposure way down, and as you can see, I'm creating this gradient. All right, so we're starting off really dark over here, and then we're gradually moving into brightness. So the filter is applying itself to this section, and it's gradually tapering off as we move our way to Ashley. Now, this is obviously a huge edit. We don't want to do that, but if we move it all the way to the right, the opposite happens. We can brighten that section completely, ridiculously, insanely, or we can darken that section. So as you can see, I'm really starting to make a creative localized edit. I'm not affecting the rest of the pixels in the image. Nothing's happening to Ashley's face or to her eyes or to her skin or anything. All we're working with is this corner right here, because I've basically told this filter that I only want to affect that corner. So we start off really, really dark here. The edit is very heavy in this corner, and as we gradually move from left to right, the edit tapers off into nothing. So let's go back to our development panel really quick, and let's zero this back out. Now, why would I want to create a tapered darkness off to that left-hand corner? Well, there's a fundamental rule. I don't want to call it a rule. I want to call it a fundamental practice. I want to call it maybe a fundamental preference, that typically in the portrait world, if the background is darker than the subject, that is the person, then the person tends to pop out against that background. So knowing that, if I can make just my background darker, let's go over here and make this just a tad darker. That looks pretty good. And I can use as many of these filters as I want. Let's create yet another one starting right here. Okay, so I've just got my filter clicked and I've got my crosshairs. If I start right here and I click and drag, basically what Lightroom is going to do is it's going to apply the parameters of that previous filter onto this new filter. Now I don't need to go that dark because at this point I've got one filter going here, one filter going there. They're starting to overlap one another and they're getting way too dark. So in this newly created filter, I'm going to back off just a little bit. Let's go a little bit closer to 0. And I really want to do, see, here's about 0. What I really want to do is just barely make that left-hand side just a little bit darker. Once again, let's grab a new filter and let's start over on this side and move in this direction. And what I want to do is make this right-hand side of the frame a little bit darker. So let's darken down our exposure just a little bit right there. Move that in. And as you can see, just with a couple of quick little filters, I have drastically darkened down the background, but I've left Ashley in her original exposure. So she, by comparison to the background, is a little bit brighter. And when a person is brighter than her background, she really pops out. Look at how much we've done just with a few quick little graduated neutral density filters. We basically made Ashley the absolute star of this image. There's no way the viewer can look at this and be like, I don't know, what am I supposed to be looking at? It's pretty obvious. The light is telling us that Ashley is the brightest thing in the image, and therefore that is where our attention should be focused. So that is the graduated neutral density filter in a nutshell. So I'm going to click this one more time. We're going to close that filter up, and we're only going to really dabble in these two right here. We've got the graduated neutral density filter, and then we've got the circular neutral density filter. This is another very powerful tool. It's relatively new to Lightroom, I would say within the last couple of years. But basically this allows us to do the exact same thing. Again, I'll show an example of this. I'm just going to create just kind of a quick circle around Ashley's face. And this allows me to create edits just within the circle. So I'm only affecting what happens within that circle. So let's zero that out. I'll go over here. I'll click once on this guy and I'll hit the delete key on the keyboard. It will remove that filter. And now we can start fresh. So what I want to do now is I want to bring a little bit of life into Ashley's eyes. So again, we shot this closer to the end of the day. The light was failing, it was getting dark, it was actually starting to rain. Blah, 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 the excuse-o-matic goes on and on. All the same, her eyes are looking a little bit more dull than I would like them to. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go into my library mode here. Let's go back to this, and I'm just going to zoom in on Ashley's face. So I'm going to click one time, and I'm going to zoom into kind of a full pixel mode on Ashley's face. Then I'm going to go back into my development module. Now, as you can see, she's not 100,000,000% razor sharp, and that's totally on me. I probably flicked my wrist just a little bit, got a tiny little tinge of motion blur in there, added on to the fact that it was getting a little bit dark that day. Let's overlook that for just now. What I want to do is I want to focus in on just Ashley's eyes. They tend to look a little bit dark right now, and I feel like we can punch just a little bit more life into them. So let's zoom on in. Here we are in our development module, and let's use the circular gradient tool to just draw roughly kind of a shape, and I can kind of grab the ends here and I can angle the shape around, and then I can kind of go back and change it a little bit after the fact and get a shape right around her eye. Next, I want to grab my exposure slider. And as you can see, again, this is a localized edit, so everything that I do within this edit only happens within this circle. So if I go really far down this way, Ashley turns into a shark, and if I go really far up this way, she turns into some kind of a vampire who can see in the dark. But what we want to do is we just want to create a very subtle edit, and I want to come up a couple of points and bring just a little bit of extra brightness into her eye. So I've gone up 0.56, let's just make that an even 0.5. So I've added a half of stop of brightness into just her eye. Now, since we do this to one of the eyes, we should probably do this to the other eye. So let's grab yet another tool, and let's come over here and make roughly an eye-shaped edit. And again, let's say 0.5 works for that one. Watch what happens when I click the button. Watch inside the circle. Boom, we get just a tiny little bit brighter. Let's move that up and down to show that edit. And once again, so here is 0, and then here is 0.5. So we've added just a tiny, tiny, tiny little punch of brightness back into Ashley's eyes. Let's close this tool down and zoom back out to get kind of a full idea. Oh yeah, that looks much better. As you can see, we've added just a tiny little punch of brightness back into Ashley's eyes to give them just a tiny little bit of fill light. So we're using the incredible power of the raw file to bring that light up just a little bit. Let's see what it looks like when we overdo it. Come back in, grab this particular edit and move this all the way up to 1.4 and then close the tool. Now, as you can see, it kind of looks like Ashley has a glass eye. It looks really artificial. So again, this tends to be a little bit of a beginner mistake. People like to go crazy on their localized edits. We want to keep it subtle. So let's open that tool back up again. Let's select that particular edit and go back to 0.5. We're at 1.64. So we've made this 1.64 stops brighter than what Mother Nature intended. So 0.5, come back down, close the tool. That's actually a very natural looking edit. So as you can see, we can use localized edits, in this case, the graduated neutral density filter, coming in over here and a little bit over here. And then of course the circular gradient filter to make some really cool looking localized edits. And a lot of these just come down to your artistic choice. There is no right or wrong answer in how you do this. It's just kind of what makes you feel good. In this case, I typically follow a pretty simple formula. Make the background a little bit darker than the person, and the person is going to pop out and make it so that the viewer just can't take her eyes off of the person. So let's move right along and apply some of these edits to the rest of the images in our collection. I'm going to move to the next section. And just for kicks, because these images are quite similar, I'm going to hit the previous button, and we will use this to learn a very valuable lesson. So previous, click, and boom. All right, now as you can see, we've created a couple of problems here. Because we're talking about localized edits, Ashley has moved a little bit. And specifically when I look at my circular graduated neutral density filters, you can see that her eyes are no longer in these positions. And if I grab onto one of these and I kind of start moving things around, I can see, well, that's not Ashley's eye anymore, that's her cheek. So what we need to do, anytime that we are synchronizing local edits across multiple images, we need to make sure that they still line up in the correct location. So let's grab this one and move it over here. And let's grab this one, grab and move it over here. So now they once again line up with her eyes. Close that. Let's move into our graduated neutral density filters. This one, as you can see, is starting to encroach on Ashley's face, maybe a little bit too much. So let's grab this. We can always go back and we can dial this back. So I'm going to move this one back just a little bit to about there. This one also, it's getting kind of close. I think we can dial that one back just a tad. This one here actually could stand to come a little bit closer because she has leaned farther into this direction. Let's move over and close this panel. So once again, you want to be really careful about synchronizing local edits across multiple images because typically your person moves around a little bit and those local edits are no longer going to line up with what they're supposed to line up to. You don't want to have somebody's eyeball edit landing on someone's cheek or someone's nose or someone's lips. So we always have to be careful that we're paying attention to where those things go. So moving right along, let's click here and let's just do the same thing. When I hit previous, we're going to see our localized edits probably aren't lining up in the right place, but that's okay because we can always change them around. So previous, here we go. Yep, I can see a spot right here on Ashley's forehead. That's basically where an eyeball edit is supposed to go. So let's grab these and start to move them around. Here is one eyeball. Let's move that where it's supposed to go. And let's move this one where it's supposed to go. That should get them in the right place. Next, let's move over to our graduated neutral density filters. And this guy looks like he could even come a little bit closer. You look pretty good there. And you could dial back a little bit so that you're not encroaching on her too much. All right, and that's a pretty good edit just like that. Moving right along. Let's keep going with our same process. I've hit the previous button. My localized edits are copied over. Again, there's a big bright spot on Ashley's cheek. I can tell that's where her eyeball is supposed to go. Since we are in fact in the graduated neutral density filter tool, let's do these first. So this one could kind of come back a little bit. This one is getting a little bit strong. This edit over here in this corner is getting way too strong. We don't want to dive into the shadows that deeply. So I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to dial this back. It's at minus 0.94. It doesn't need to be that dark. Let's go a little easier there. Maybe kind of make it about 5. That's good. This one here, again, that one's not affecting us too drastically. But let's make sure that we get in and take care of our eyes. Here we are. Ashley's eyes were in this section during our previous composition. So let's get these adjusted up properly. Make that edit where her eyes are locally just a little bit brighter. That looks good there. Close that. Okay, overall, this looks pretty nice. I feel like overall this image is still a little bit dark compared to the other ones, so let's punch the overall exposure up to another point. I'm gonna go to 0.35. Boom, that makes us just a tad brighter. I like that. That's a good edit. All right, moving right along. Let's once again hit the previous button, and as you can see, all of our edits are no longer in the right place, just as they have been in all their last images. Ashley's eyes are not actually making a connection to the viewer in this image at all. So I don't see a reason to have these circular local edits in here. I mean, I can put this on her eye and it would just kind of brighten things up, but I don't think that's necessary at all. So I'm just going to go here and I'm just going to hit the delete key, get rid of that one. I'm going to touch once on this other piece, delete that one. Not a necessary edit. As far as the rest of the stuff, these look pretty good. This corner is getting a little extra dark, but in this case, I don't really mind it because it's so far away from her compositionally that I don't think we need to worry about that. So let's go down to our next image. Here we are. Now, if I click previous on this image, all I'm going to get are my graduated neutral density filters, because in the last image that we just worked on, we deleted both of the circular filters that were covering our eyes. So this will be a good chance for us to go back in and practice with our circular neutral density filter tool. Let's go right in here and we'll create one for this eye. I'm going to angle it down just a little bit. And I think 0.5 has been working nicely for us. So let's just type that in, 0.5. That brings that eye up a little bit brighter. And let's go into this eye. We'll move that over just a little bit. Once again, 0.5. Let's close this panel. And yes, her eyes have definitely just barely kind of nicely punched out just a little bit. This image is nice and razor sharp, thank you. Kind of lost our touch on that previous shot, but that's okay. We want to make sure that we get stuff nice and sharp. And so this is looking like a pretty good image. I've got a little extra darkness happening back over here. I don't think that we need to be that dark, so I'm going to go into my graduated neutral density filter, and I'm going to target this one up here in the top. Now, another thing that we can do, we're not just relegated to exposure. We can make things brighter and we can make things darker. We can affect the contrast and the highlights and all this other stuff. But another cool thing that we can do with this particular filter is we can affect the color temperature. So as I slide this color temperature to the left, things get cooler. And as I go to the right, things get quite a bit warmer. Now, this tends to be definitely a very creative decision-making process. Do you make your color temperature cooler or brighter? In this case, I kind of like it a tad cooler, because what that does is that makes the rest of the warm colors in the image really kind of pop out, and it makes that back corner slightly less interesting to the viewer, so it's not going to have to compete with Ashley, but it's also a little bit mysterious. We might be going down a little bit far on the creative context rabbit hole here, but we're going to do it just in case. It is a beginner tutorial, and I want to showcase that we can in fact affect color temperature independently of the rest of the file. So let's let that corner back there be a little bit kind of blue, looks a little bit dark, like it's kind of fading into the shadow of the forest. That's super cool. And while we're here talking about color temperature, let's just go in and grab some of the rest of this file. I'm going to use some circular filters. I'm going to put one right up in the top here, adjust that over just a little bit. And since we've made all of that cool color off to the left, let's balance that equation with a tiny little bit of cool color. Whoop, just right there. Let's see, I'm dragging my filter up here in the top right. I'm going to add just a little bit of cool color into the top right to try and balance some of that really dark green out from happening over here. And now while we're in this circular filter, I'm going to bring a new one right through here. And I'm seeing a great deal of warm tones, reds, oranges, yellows. And so I'm actually going to accentuate the warmer tones right here. So I'm going to use this kind of big blob to increase color temperature. Let's bring it all the way up. That makes it kind of hot. All the way down makes it cold. But what I want to do is just barely bring that color temperature up just a little bit on that side to kind of warm this section up. And now, again, in order to balance this section, let's grab another one. We'll put it right over here, angle it in just like that, maybe make it a tad larger. And since we've warmed things up on the right, I want to warm things up just on the left here where we do have some warm colors coming through. So again, super warm, super cold, just want to be subtle with it. I want to add a few points of warmth in there. And while we're at it, I see some nice warm tones down here. I'm just going to add a little bit of warmth down there in that corner as well. Okay, so now as you can see, we've literally loaded this entire file up with all kinds of circular gradient tools. They're very handy because they allow you to target specific areas of the file and really get in and control that color, control that tonality, control the look and feel of the image. Now, Lightroom didn't used to be able to do this. You used to only be able to kind of slide these big ticket sliders around in our main development module and make the whole picture brighter or darker or whatever. These little local adjustment tools give you a great deal of power to start taking creative control over your image. Now again, this shot was getting towards the end of the day and it's feeling a little bit overall darker than the rest of the files that we shot. So I'm going to go in here to my overall exposure and I'm going to punch this up to about 0.48. give or take, and that's going to add just a tiny last little flare of brightness to the overall image. I feel like that's a pretty nice edit. There's one final thing I want to do to this file. We're going to go once again back to our circular gradient tool, and I'm going to bring one right in over top of Ashley's hair. As we discussed in previous modules, people with brunette hair tend to have their hair shadows just really kind of burn out and darken down into oblivion. Now in this case, I want to actually just select just Ashley's hair and I want to bring that up just a little bit so that we can, here's our local edit, here's too dark, here's too bright. I want to bring that up just a little bit so I can start to see some of the details in her hair. I don't want to do too much, but I don't want her hair to just turn turn away into a completely black blob, because we are at this point losing the light of the day and the image is getting a little bit darker. So I'm going to punch that up just a little bit so that we can actually see some of the highlights in Ashley's hair. All right, so as you can see, let's close this panel up. As you can see, we have created a lot of local edits to this file. When I turn on my circular neutral density filter, we've just got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, probably 7. I don't know, I lost count at this point. So this is probably a little bit more than you would do to your average file, but just to kind of showcase the local editing power of Lightroom's raw capabilities, I think we went a little nuts on this file. But again, it's quite a beautiful image. It's got a lot going on. We've got this creamy shallow depth of field. There's a lot happening in front of Ashley. We've got these beautiful little wheat grass tufts kind of coming up in front. There's some here in the middle ground. She's nice and sharp. She's creating this beautiful compositional shape with her arm, and then the background slowly fades off into this beautiful faded out oblivion. So altogether, even despite all of those edits that we've done, the overall image still looks really natural. Again, stay out of the color slider. Don't oversaturate your images. That's just out of control. The world does not need yet another blown out Instagram filter. So try to stay natural on your color, and don't completely extract all of the color in Lightroom. That's something that you're going to do in Photoshop. Now, if you really need a quick black and white, sure, do it in Lightroom. But for the most part, I recommend leaving our color sliders completely alone in Lightroom, especially when it comes to portraits. There is plenty of color information in this file without going crazy on the saturation slider. All right, friends, I think that takes us far enough down the development module rabbit hole for a beginner Lightroom tutorial. Now that we're done organizing and editing our files in Lightroom, it's time to export them and share them with the world. In our next module, we will learn how to export our files from Lightroom. I look forward to getting started, and we'll see you in the next lesson.
Not bad, right? Lightroom gives us some pretty cool creative capabilities using the Advanced Development module. We're coming up on the home stretch. In our next lesson, we will learn how to export our files for safekeeping. In the meantime, be sure to like and subscribe to this channel. We have a lot of cool new stuff coming up, and I don't want you to miss it. In the meantime, we'll see you in the next lesson.